On this week's show, I'm going to talk a lot about the catcher Clint Courtney. We might even go overtime. I have so much to say about Clint Courtney. Major league catcher from 1951 to 1961, a left-handed hitter, not a huge bat, but often a solid one, and with great contact skills. For example, in 1953, he had 397 at-bats and struck out but 7 times. He was the first catcher to wear glasses on the field, which is going to come up a lot because, you know the old line, you wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would ya? It actually makes you more likely to be hit. The glasses are somehow a provocation and incitement to violence. Of course, Courtney incited violence himself all the time, so maybe damage to his glasses was inevitable. If people are always trying to punch you in the face, they're going to miss sometimes or intentionally miss and hit your glasses. He had some issues with anger and impulse control. I've been getting in fights since I was a kid, he once said. I don't know why. I don't usually start them, only when things aren't going right for me. His teammates called him Scrap Iron and the Toy Bulldog, among other things. We'll get to one of those in a bit. He started, as I said, a lot of fights. He lost most of them. Here, though, in this segment, I want to tell a story that's complimentary to him. This is a depiction of Clint Courtney, hothead of Hall Summit, Louisiana, as a true friend. Now ask yourself, if you were in Clint Courtney's position in this story, would you be as generous and bold as he was? Most of the Clint Courtney stories revolve around his fighting with the Yankees, physically fighting with them, but he came very close to being a Yankee himself. In fact, he was one in the major leagues for a hot moment. He reached the majors with the Yankees at 24 years old in 1951, but he was behind Yogi Berra, and the Yankees already had a couple of veteran backup catchers that they liked better, Charlie Silvera and Ralph Houck, and one suspects that the reason that they preferred those two as opposed to the left-handed hitting Courtney was that they were right-handed. Yogi was very durable, liked to play, and didn't miss many days. It's not like he ever took a day off, but if you ever did plan to have a scheduled day off for Yogi, who was a left-handed hitter himself, you'd want to maximize the opportunity by getting a platoon advantage out of it. George Weiss, the Yankees general manager, was also very concerned about the personality of his players and may have felt that Clint Courtney was wrong for the Yankees, as he felt that Billy Martin, who was with the Yankees at this time, and will be a major part of this episode today, was wrong for the Yankees. And so, about 3 seconds after Courtney reached the majors, he was traded to the Browns for a swingman. I would tell you that Courtney played the Yankees very hard after that because he had an animus due to being traded, but he played everybody hard, and he was always a chippy player. He was only 5'8". Maybe he had short man syndrome. There are several stories of him taking dares, offering to race someone who said, I'm faster than you are. And it seems like he had a hard time saying no in those situations. He didn't win too many of that kind of fight either, but he just kept doing it. He died young at 48 while managing in the minor leagues. He had a fatal heart attack on a road trip while playing ping pong table tennis. Now, that could have happened for any number of basic medical reasons, but I kind of like to imagine that it happened because he took being aced in ping pong too seriously. According to Courtney's minor league manager and teammate, Charlie Metro, Courtney hustled ping pong sometimes. He was very good at it. That was when he was a prospect. When he died, he was managing the Braves AAA team and owned a ranch. I bring up those 3 things in juxtaposition because one happened when he was 20, and his passing happened more than twice his life later. He was an adult by then. Seems like it was a successful ranch, too. Braves first baseman Joe Adcock was from Coushatta, Louisiana, the same place, roughly, that Courtney was from. The population of Coushatta is a few pigs and cattle, and Clint Courtney has all the cattle, Adcock said. You'd think that guy wouldn't have a coronary while hustling ping pong in middle age, but who knows? He was just intense. A 1954 profile in the Washington Post said, he is an expert pinball machine player, reads pocket-sized mystery stories, and sometimes plays hearts. He hates to lose, even at hearts. When an opponent slips him the black queen, Courtney's trigger temper explodes, and for blocks around, ladies blush. That's an anachronism now, right? I mean, I'm from New Jersey. We all swear too much. I swear too much, certainly. But we're less precious, I think, overall about ladies swearing or hearing cuss words. I feel like ladies swear all the time. If you're listening from Nebraska and people are still all dainty about things like that, let me know. It would help me understand some things. As I hinted a moment ago, Courtney's most famous fights in the majors were with Billy Martin. He had two. Billy was a very chippy guy himself. I mean, who didn't have a notable fight with Billy Martin? With both of those fights, oddly enough, Courtney was the aggressor. I don't think Billy did anything wrong. He certainly didn't turn the other cheek, but he didn't start anything. Courtney definitely did. And it was felt that way at the time. That's how the punishments were meted out as well. As we'll see later, to Billy, Courtney being the aggressor wasn't sufficient. His own narcissism required him to puff Courtney up, to make him evil, an arch villain, to justify the thrashings that Billy gave him, which weren't that severe. They were just baseball fights. As we'll see, there was a third fight that Billy wasn't really part of. It happened in the low minors in 1947, when Billy was, pardon the expression, just a kid. And Billy told that story and retold it and fictionalized it in the process until it bore little resemblance to reality. The first fight involving Martin took place in 1952. We'll get back to that. But the second one happened on April 28th, 1953. It was in a game between the Yankees and the Browns at Sportsman's Park in St. Louis. I guess they were calling it Busch Stadium by then. In the top of the 10th, Yankees third baseman Gil McDougald had tried to score from second on a comebacker, followed by a force out at second base. I have no idea what he was thinking, and without having film of that game, I can't really visualize it either, but when he saw he was going to be out by a mile, he figured his one chance was to level Courtney, and it worked. He should have been out on a 1-6-2 play, but McDougald hit Courtney so hard, he dropped the ball, and his glasses went flying, the ultimate indignity for the bespectacled male. Courtney was not happy. When he led off the bottom of the 10th, he turned to Yogi, who was catching, and said, "Someone's gonna pay. I don't care who." He pulled an Allie Reynolds pitch to the right field screen for a single. He tried to stretch it into a double, but the point wasn't to get an extra base, not really. It was to slide into second. Hank Bauer got a quick handle on the ball in right field, and his throw had Courtney beat. Phil Rizzuto made the play. Courtney came in spikes high, gashing Phil, not too badly, on the thigh and shin. Didn't matter. Courtney was all alone out there with 9 Yankees, and 5 of them converged on him and went to work. Courtney came out of it with bruised lips. He lost one shoe and his glasses, but recovered them, reported the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. Martin was one of the quintet rearranging Courtney's dental work. It took 17 minutes to get the game going again, in part because the St. Louis fans wouldn't stop throwing bottles. The Yankees required a police escort to leave the park after the game, and despite being flanked by 2 ushers, Casey Stengel exited the clubhouse holding a bat. The American League president put 100% of the blame for the fight on Courtney. Courtney's comment was, "They can't push me around like that and expect me to take it." Now, as I said, Billy Martin told stories of his fights with Courtney over and over again, changing details every time, and in the process, pretty heavily fictionalizing things. Of this one, Martin later said, "After the fight, Whitey Ford said, 'I threw the best punch.' I said, 'I didn't see you throw any punches.' He said, 'No, look at this.' Whitey had stomped on Courtney's glasses and shattered them into a million little pieces. He was standing there holding up the twisted frames." As with many of the stories Whitey Ford, Mickey Mantle, and Billy Martin told on each other, this one didn't happen. If it did, though, it was deeply ungrateful on Ford's part. In his own memoir, Slick, My Life in and Around Baseball, Ford said that after the 1948 season, Courtney, then his teammate on the Yankees farm team at Norfolk, asked him to join him playing winter ball in Mexico. The Mazatlan club, he said, was willing to pay $400 a month, twice what the Yankees were paying the young pitcher. Ford went and had what sounds like a very good time, until he came down with amoebic dysentery. You know, not to be too blunt about it, but diarrhea. He wrote, "When I got sick down there, I didn't trust the doctors, so I asked the Mexican players for some home remedies. I heard if you drank blackberry brandy and ate cheese, it would stop the diarrhea. I tried, but it didn't work. Every time I so much as drank a glass of water, I would wind up on the toilet for 20 minutes. It got so my rear end was so sore, I would squat up in bed on my elbows and knees, and Clint Courtney would sprinkle baby powder on me to cool off my rear. And to that, I have just this one thing to say. A friend who will sit up with you when your ass is on fire, when your cheeks are chafed, your anus is inflamed, your rectum is in rebellion, is willing to gaze into the abyss and have the abyss gaze into him, and is doing this on a truly platonic, non-romantic, non-sexual, totally disinterested humanitarian basis, and he's not your doctor, that is a true friend. You will never have a better one. To stomp that guy's glasses with all those glasses have seen of you in particular is the height of ingratitude and liable to bring 21 years of bad luck. Oddly enough, this is an explicit part of the Hippocratic Oath, the Pledge of Allegiance, and the Mickey Mouse Club alma mater, but only in the versions at use in the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show. This is the Infinite Inning, episode 359. I am, as ever, your convivial host, Stephen Goldman, for this trip, a mission to the past to better understand the present, the time machine being the game of baseball. I have a lot to say to you this week, not only in the second act of the show, when I will tell you more about Clint Courtney and his many battles, specifically those with Billy Martin, both real and semi-imagined. Researching that one drove me nuts. You'll soon see why. I hope you'll empathize. It has a lot to do with spelling. Not mine, other people's, multiple other people's. I'll give you a hint. Imagine that the word cheese, just picking that off the top of my head, was kind of obscure. You'd never seen it written down before. And some players said, "It's like Bob Cheese said." Well, you're pretty confident as to how to spell Bob, but cheese, you're nervous, you're unsure, and your editor doesn't know either, so it gets past everyone. So one person spells it correctly, cheese, C-H-E-E-S-E. Someone else spells it C-H-E-Z. Some others spell it C-H-E-E-Z-E-E, and so on. And a fourth guy, just to be weird, didn't hear it as cheese at all, but as melon. So it's just like Bob Melon said, which throws you off completely. I experienced all of that. Plus, of all of them, Bob Cheese, Bob Ches, Bob Shays, Bob Melon, if you figure you can go to Baseball Reference, put them all in, and figure that the one who comes up is your guy, you'd be wrong, because Baseball Reference doesn't have 3 of the 4, and the 4th, it's misfiled. Before I move on here or keep complaining, let me mention I've continued to add new players to the Dead Player of the Day roles at Patreon. And as always, that title is tongue-in-cheek. I well understand that we are talking about someone's dad, someone's brother. I believe I left 2 of the 5 open to non-members, so anyone can show up and read. And I also freed up an older one which is in the Infinite Inning book, Baseball's Brief Lives, because I wanted to reference it in what I wrote for Baseball Prospectus this week, and I figured fair is fair. If I'm going to link it, anybody should be able to come on in. So that guy was Billy Hunter. The new players were Kid Gleason, Hoagie Pittenger, Bobby Richardson, Sam Leslie, and Jay Partridge. Now, there are a couple of real obscurities in there, but I hope with all of them that you find I found something insightful to say about every single one, such that the obscurities are no longer obscure. That with each, you now have a hook for for your memories. With Gleason and Richardson in particular, I was having so much fun putting that together and finding new quotes and new anecdotes to share with you, new to me at least. They might not have been new to readers of 70 or 60 years ago, that I had a hard time stopping. In my mind, these are supposed to be a paragraph or two each, but they're articles in the case of Gleason and Richardson. But if they're fun for you, I don't mind the extra time. And on that note, I would like to thank our newest Patreon cats, Seth, Will, and Bruce. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Seth, Will, and Bruce. Do you know each other? Seth, meet Will, Bruce, Will, Bruce, Seth. I very much appreciate it. As I alluded to a moment ago, this week at Baseball Prospectus, I wrote about the 17-player trade the Yankees and Orioles made in 1954. I believe I covered that on the show way back towards the first year. I don't think I've reissued that one yet. And how I would desperately like to see something even vaguely diverting come out of baseball right now because the real world is too distressing to face. And on that note, look, I know you're mostly coming here for baseball stories that interrelate with the world outside your window without being too blunt about it. The baseball is the spoonful of sugar that helps the medicine go down, and I can't be too bothered by that limitation when that's by my own design. And yet, this last week has been so dire that I want to be blunt for a moment. There is no place for decent people in America right now. Every value we had has been forsaken, mocked, parodied, turned inside out, and become a mirror version of itself. All our elites have capitulated to a greater or lesser extent as the soul-devouring worm empties us from within. I'm not even talking about the kidnapping or murder of good people by ICE in the name of our having a white ethno-nationalist state. Think, too, about who rules us and what their goals are and what suckers we've been. And to be clear, because I just put that aside way too fast, I am gutted by the murder in Minnesota this week. Gutted by it. There is nothing in refusing the order of a police officer short of drop that weapon that makes you liable to summary execution on the street. And I'm sorry, but having watched all the videos, painful as they are, multiple times, a smiling Minneapolis mom attempting to make a K-turn is in no way performing a terrorist act. But the reason I bring up the other stuff, the stuff about being suckers, about being the victims of con men, is that I hope if someone understands some of the con in other areas, in a case like this, where the grounds are liable to be muddied with people telling you, well, you didn't see what you just saw, or what you just saw isn't what you think you saw, that you might realize that if they lie in one place, they lie in another. And by you, I don't mean you, the infinite inning listener, the discerning gentleman or gentlewoman, but anyone that you might encounter in your day-to-day lives or online lives. I know I said a little about Venezuela last week. Let me say something else about that country. Land of Luis Aparicio, land of Vic Davalillo. That's a baseball dynasty, the Davalillo family, both here and there. There's a teenage member of that same family in the Angels system right now, Gabriel Davalillo. I hope he's allowed to play here in the U.S. this year, but who the heck knows what's going on with players coming out of Venezuela in the coming season. Have you ever watched a pirate movie? Not the Pittsburgh Pirates, that would be Angels in the Outfield, which I talked about during the holidays, but say something with Errol Flynn or Tyrone Power or Walter Matthau. That's a really weird Roman Polanski film. Ever gone to a Disney park and ridden Pirates of the Caribbean? I realize I sound like Peter Graves in Airplane right now. Bobby, have you ever seen a pirate movie? Have you ever wondered what those pirates did below decks when they got lonely? I realize that, but let's try to be serious for just a moment. What story is that ride telling you in its second portion, the part after you see all the skeletons? It's showing you something pirates actually did, besides whatever went on below deck. God only knows. They didn't just fight at sea, trying to capture the ships of the Spanish treasure fleet. I mean, that's hard. The ocean is big and those ships fight back. But no, they raided stationary targets too, meaning towns. That's what's depicted on the ride. You sailed your ship into the harbor, you bombarded the town into submission, you tied up the leaders, you raided the treasury, you drank their booze, and you left. If you follow the news at all, this is already starting to sound familiar. You know what the United States just did in Venezuela? They did that. They're calling it regime change, but all they did was tie up the leader. They left the leader's gang in place. The leader's gang may or may not be cooperating because another bombardment is possible. There are big floating and flying guns aimed at the place saying, your oil money or your life, you dirty rat. There's nothing about that which is true imperialism or colonialism or any other ism other than gangsterism. It's not the kind of regime change the neocons attempted so ineffectively in Iraq and Afghanistan. When you invade, kick out the old ruling class, put in your viceroy or your handpicked local. This is just a protection racket, like Jimmy Cagney in The Public Enemy. Nice country you have here. Shame if anything were to happen to it. It's your money or your life, and that's all it is. And there are multiple giveaways of that here. And this is not just me being a lefty or having sympathy for the Venezuelans who have been screwed in a lot of ways going back decades, or having antipathy towards the administration, but rather just a reading of what they're actually saying, which is we want the oil. We are taking the oil, which is not particularly valuable right now because of the price of oil and the kind of oil it is, the amount of money we're supposedly going to realize from that oil, which is a lot of money for an individual pirate, but not very much for a whole nation. And the fact that we, the people, are not realizing it, but rather it is intended, it is explicitly, overtly going to go into a slush fund controlled by the president. None of this is subtle. It's not like a video where you can say, oh, well, you're seeing her go left, but she really went right. Or from the officer's perspective, it wasn't so cut and dry. They just said it. We took their guy. We're going to take their oil. We're not going to put it in the general fund. We're going to put it in this account. Again, when the pirates sailed up to Maracaibo, in modern Venezuela, no less, back in the 1600s, and grabbed all the gold and jewels in town that they could find, they weren't pursuing regime change. They just wanted their stuff. As I indicated a few moments ago, I don't want to get too caught up in that scheme because what happened in Minneapolis this week is so dire. As I said on this week's reissue episode, the war is not just there, it's here. And we don't seem to care. The people we elected to care don't care. The oligarchs are giggling at it. And we have the ability to change this at any time, oligarchs or not, media or not, simply by saying no. But as yet, we lack the numbers, the volume, the voice. It's gravity that makes change. It's mass. And somehow we lack both, despite all these blasphemies against our entire heritage. And so, until something shifts, if it shifts, we have to try to live through it and hope that at some point we do what Lincoln begged us to do 165 years ago and recall the better angels of our nature, by which I mean our basic American values. My favorite historical political blog, Lawyers, Guns, and Money, I've had some of their writers on the show, linked to an essay by John Gans yesterday, as I say these words, on Friday the 9th of January. That is, you can find it at unpopularfront.news. It's called Living the Lie. The author quotes, among others, the Polish historian and philosopher Leszek Kolakowski, who, since he was around from 1927 to 2009, lived under a despotic regime more often than not. Kolakowski wrote, "It is perhaps the most oppressive part of life under communism. Not terror, not exploitation, but the all-pervading lie, felt by everybody, known to everybody. It is something which makes life intolerable." Gans added, "I don't know about you, but I find the endless lies and lying often to be the most infuriating and demoralizing part of the present situation. In the wake of this terrible killing in Minneapolis, my first thought, after the initial shock, anger, and sadness, was the knowledge that the next few days, months, weeks, and years would be filled with endless lying about what happened from the regime and its stooges. This filled me, if not quite with despair, then at least with a strong sense of depression. I suppose it has something to do with my vocation as a historian, where I can accept tragedy and even evil as unavoidable parts of the human experience, so long as witness can be borne and the truth eventually discovered." Well, folks, that synthesizes my mood precisely. And so here I am, and here we are together, with some stories of a catcher who last played 64 years ago, who died 50 years ago, and who, by total coincidence, had a problem with impulse control resulting in self-defeating violence. It's mostly meant to be fun, to talk about, to listen to, not as a commentary on anything happening right now. I began working on this story a week ago. I thought it would be a quick thing, but it took forever, in part because so much was written about Courtney during his career. For a catcher who never made an all-star team, whose peak more or less came in 1952, when the Sporting News named him the American League Rookie of the Year, a designation that used to matter a little bit. In the BBWAA voting, he finished second. He played on second division teams his whole career, but he got so much attention. I guess that happens when you keep hitting Yankees and Yankees keep hitting you. But boy, I bit off quite a hunk of story. And biting on Courtney is problematic because at least on one occasion, he patted his mitt with stinky cheese. And depending on who you read, he either was pranked or he did it intentionally. Not only that, but there was no agreement on how to spell cheese. Is there a Q in it? You bet there is. At least back in 1947. Maybe there still is. It's just a silent Q by now. Charlie Metro said that some of Courtney's teammates called him Billy Goat because he never showered. So combine that with old cheese and, well, if he wasn't offensive in one way, he was offensive in another. There are a number of contradictions like that in his life. He was a good defensive catcher with a great arm, who also developed Mackie Sasser's disease and couldn't throw the ball back to the pitcher or to second base. He had to take a couple of steps out in front of the plate before he threw. And you can see that happen on his baseball card as his caught stealing percentages go from 40%, 50% to 7%. And although he was considered the pet of as obnoxious a person as Rogers Hornsby, I don't sense he was entirely a bad person. Again, it's impulse control and judgment. You give that guy a gun, or in this case, spikes, and bad things happen. Worse, you empower Billy Martin to tell a lot of stories about you. And I'll be back with that and more on the other side of this break, for which we are vastly overdue. I appreciate your patience. I know how you look forward to them breaks. Let me say this much more about Clint Courtney as a player. From 1955 through 1957, he hit .294 with a .359 on-base percentage and a .424 slugging percentage while playing in 286 games. He had 790 at-bats across those years, but struck out only 30 times. The rest of his career was more equivocal in terms of offense, but he always had a decent bat by the standards of part-time catchers, which is to say, he was never Austin Hedges. He also suffered all the usual catcher injuries, broken bones on foul tips, and takeout slides, so he had just one 500 plate appearance season and two 400 plate appearance seasons. Baseball Reference credits him with a total of 7.1 wins above replacement in about 950 career games, so let's be clear, this is not Johnny Bench who we're talking about here. That said, the guy hit .269, .339, .366 for his career. Put that in context, and it was about average for a catcher in 2025. Half of teams did worse. Guardians catchers hit .187, .269, .344, and they weren't the worst in the game. Mister, they could have used Clint Courtney. You might have seen a picture of Clint somewhere because of the knuckleball. He caught Hoyt Wilhelm for the Orioles, and manager Paul Richards, himself an old catcher, designed this umbrella-sized glove to catch the thing. Courtney was the one who got to wear it in a big league game, so there are countless photos of him posing with what is basically an extra-large pizza on one hand. Very briefly, some background. Clinton Dawson Courtney was born in Hall Summit, Louisiana in 1927. After graduating high school, he was drafted into the Army towards the end of World War II and served as part of the Army of Occupation in Japan. See, that was regime change. Although we left the emperor in place symbolically, because it made the surrender easier for the Japanese, we reformed everything under him, including the business community. And he was even, the emperor, I should say, more of a figurehead than he had been before. Courtney played some baseball over there, and pretty much as soon as he got back to the States, he was signed by Yankees scouts. His first professional assignment came in 1947. It was with the Class C Bisbee Yanks of the Arizona-Texas League. And that's when he played for Charlie Metro. He was 20 years old. Billy Martin, Alfred Manuel Martin, was playing in the same league for the Phoenix Senators. He was 19 and mostly a third baseman, although events involving Courtney would see him playing second base, his primary position in the major leagues. And there are a few more things I should tell you before we move on here. First, for those who might not have taken the prerequisite course here, Billy Martin was kind of a Kike Hernandez sort of player in the big leagues. He was mediocre during the regular season, a killer during the postseason. He was a kid from the poor part of Berkeley. He was from a single-parent household, although there was a lot of family around. His mom was kind of eccentric too, kind of a hard ass. He was always a hard ass, a gamer, a guy who didn't tolerate slack play from anyone, whether as a player, a coach, or a manager. I don't think you can underrate this either. He had a huge nose, which other kids made fun of, and he was already always on the lookout for an insult. He wanted to take offense at something. I think the nose, which he later had reduced, might have had something to do with it, or his mom, or his family situation. You really don't need to look too far to find reasons for him to be defensive. He was also, as time went on, an alcoholic, a fighter, an inveterate liar, a womanizer. I don't know how to synthesize his many personality traits without taking another hour. He was sort of the Richard Nixon of baseball, except he was better at managing than Nixon was at leadership. In the short term, Martin could get any team to play better than it had any right to. In the long term, he would burn all his bridges and get fired. At the moment that we're talking about, 1947, he was a prospect belonging to the Oakland Oaks of the Pacific Coast League, then an independent league. The Oaks had a relationship with the Yankees, however, and not a coincidence, they were being managed by Casey Stengel. Someone associated with the Oaks knew Billy from seeing him play around the area and got him a tryout with Casey. Stengel loved him immediately, loved his attitude, but Billy was, again, a kid, not ready, so the Oaks sent him further down, to Phoenix. That's how the independent minors worked, and in the late 40s, again, the PCL was still independent. Billy was great at Phoenix that year. You would think he was a huge prospect. He hit .392 with a .427 on-base percentage, a .561 slugging percentage in 130 games. He scored 141 runs and drove in 174. He was never close to being that sort of player again. In a small-scale way, it was one of the larger flukes in baseball history. He wasn't even reminiscent of that guy at the higher levels in the minors, averaging .279 with a .323 on base and a .392 slugging percentage for Oakland and Kansas City at the top of the minors, and .257, .300, .369 in the majors. He played because he was versatile, because Casey loved him, and because every team needs a utility infielder. As good as the Yankees were, they were always short one infielder, so Billy got plugged in as needed and ended up playing a lot. I don't think this had any effect on his player development, but I should mention, consistent with infinite inning themes explored as recently as this week's reissue episode, when I talked about a Yankee shortstop prospect of roughly this period whose career was derailed because he had to go off to Korea for 2 years, Billy himself lost most of 2 seasons due to military service. They were his age 26 and 27 seasons, likely peak years, but we'll never know. Finally, because Billy became such a notorious manager, with 5 terms of going around with George Steinbrenner and the Yankees, his beef with Courtney is better remembered than it would have been otherwise. It just hasn't been remembered accurately, because Martin always had to justify his own aggressive tendencies, his own poor behavior, and so he had to exaggerate Courtney's villainy as well. All right, I think we're good to go on now. I already talked about the second major league fight with Martin. Let me talk about the first. Then we'll go back to the minor league original. It was July 12th, 1952, Ladies' Day at Yankee Stadium, you know, when they blush. Courtney was having himself a day. Martin was the second baseman. Allie Reynolds was again the pitcher. Courtney had already knocked Yogi down at the plate and spiked Billy once, so the Yankees had their antennae up for further offense. Let's go to the top of the 8th. Courtney lands at first on a force out. He attempted to steal second, a very transparent attempt to start something because he was slow. Baseball writers would dare him to a foot race and he would lose. Have you ever seen a baseball writer, particularly before they let women into the clubhouse? Courtney in his career was 3 for 19 in stolen base attempts. This just wasn't something he normally would have contemplated. Now, I'll give you this much, or give him this much. He attempted the steal when Yogi turned to argue a ball strike call with the umpire. I don't know if I've ever seen that. I suppose that catchers must call time, those rare occasions they turn back to talk to the umpire. They're not supposed to do that. That's considered showing the umpire up. So you don't hear it on the broadcast, but you might see them sort of, talk out of the side of their mouth and say, think you missed that one, Frank. But if they turn back, they're liable to be run out. You do sometimes see players attempt to steal if a catcher takes too long to return the ball to the pitcher. But I feel like there's kind of a gentleman's agreement that unless that exchange is really egregiously long, it's something that players generally don't do. But Courtney ran. Yogi threw him out by a mile, despite, as far as we can tell, facing the backstop at the time. And because of everything that had happened earlier in the game, or perhaps it happened 5 years in the past, we'll get to it, Billy tagged him in the mouth. For a moment, nothing happened. Maybe Courtney momentarily blacked out. It's also possible that Billy not only shoved a ball down his throat, but disarrayed his glasses, and Courtney needed a moment to get them back on his face. The way Martin described it to Peter Golenbach for Martin's 1981 memoir, Number One, he said, I knocked him colder than a cucumber. I stood waiting for him to get up, but he didn't. And I figured if I stopped out there any longer, I would get in trouble with the umpires, so I started running to the bench. Our pitcher, Allie Reynolds, yelled for me to look out, and Courtney threw a right hand that just missed me. If he had connected, he would have landed me in the upper deck. Now, Martin told that story many times, and pretty consistently. It jibes with the stories as the game was reported at the time as well. Martin turns away. Allie Reynolds shouts, "Duck, Billy, duck!" And then there's Courtney looming behind him. In a much later version, when Martin was trying to defend himself from Jim Brewer's lawsuit, after Martin had charged the mound and broken Brewer's cheek, Billy said he had never started a fight in his life. I love the passive voice phrasing he used in that story to describe the first Courtney incident, or I should say the second game, but the first one that we're talking about. I have no regrets over my job on Courtney. I was forced to tag him on the mouth on a play at second base. Forced? How exactly? By what unearthly power were you compelled to tag him in the mouth? Here's how the papers described it. Courtney's hat was knocked off, and he whirled around and hollered at the second baseman. They ran right at one another on the grass near second base, throwing punches. The Yankee connected with a couple of rights, and then they clinched. Umpire Bill Summers tried to break it up, but players from both sides began to pile on like a football scrimmage, and Summers was knocked flat. Both benches emptied in a few seconds, and at least a dozen players, as well as umps McKinley, Knapp, and Summers, were in the mounting mass. The New York Times said, Billy planted the ball right on Martin's mouth. Wait, what did my mouth just say? Martin didn't plant the ball in his own mouth. That would have been sort of masochistic. No, he planted it squarely on Courtney's mouth. Martin started to trot to the dugout, but Courtney, bent on evening matters, headed for Martin. Billy heard Courtney's approach, wheeled quickly to meet it, and, on the theory that the best defense is a speedy offense, promptly met Courtney with two perfectly aimed right-handers to the jaw. After that, they clinched, the dugouts emptied, you already know. There's a photo of the clinch. I put it in the Facebook group. Would it help those listeners not on Facebook if I put it on Patreon as well? I really can't tell if the picture shows A, Courtney with his hand under Martin's knee, trying to throw him to the ground, B, Billy kneeing Courtney in the stomach, or C, Billy kneeing Courtney in the unmentionables. I suspect it's the viewer's choice, whichever makes you happiest, I guess, A, B, or C. Courtney was the only player ejected, knee to the groin or not. In both of these games, the 1952 and 1953 games, Courtney got the highest fines. Courtney got the only suspension. I don't think anyone was suspended for the 53 game, but in 52, he was suspended for 3 days, which meant 5 games because the Browns had a couple of double headers coming up. Now, let's go backwards in time, I mean. That's sort of our specialty around here. As I've already indicated, Billy and Clint had an animi for each other that went back to 1947. And as I said earlier, tracking this down drove me nuts because Billy kept telling the story a different way, and each writer heard a certain name he was using a different way. In addition, Baseball Reference's stats on this particular player are not accurate, so at first I missed the guy. If they had been accurate, I would have figured this out in about a nanosecond. Let's go back to to the book number 1. Billy said he had watched Courtney spike players all through the minors. As I said earlier, Courtney really did have a problem. He was cited in the papers that year, 1947. He was 20, Billy 19, as sliding spikes high. Although, so was Billy Martin. On the other hand, stories like, "It took 2 cops to hold off the fans at Mesa the other night after Clint Courtney, Bisbee's belligerent catcher, hit Bill Earhart of the Orphans in the face with a mask." Those stories were all Courtney's. Probably because at second base or third base, Billy didn't wear a mask. Now, Courtney didn't hit anyone on Billy Martin's team with a mask, and he didn't hit Billy either. But there were 2 incidents that year that he used to justify retroactively his punching Clint Courtney in a couple of major league games. And I will tell you what those were right after this second brief intermission, the last one of the episode. At least that's how I'm planning things right now. Here's how Billy Martin remembered Clint Courtney in 1947. In a big beef, Courtney spiked my manager, Archie Biggs, and broke his arm. When I came to Biggs' rescue, Courtney turned on me. I shut my eyes and swung with both hands as fast as I could. Mr. Courtney went down. He had exaggerated. Biggs was both the manager and the second baseman. On August 1st, 1947, Courtney had slid into him with, and I quote, "spikes high," and kicked the ball from Biggs' mitt. The fighting Senator manager came up swinging, and his fist met Courtney's right eye. In one of those occasions when real life has literary foreshadowing, Biggs might have been holding the baseball as he struck. So here is a player who, in the course of this one episode, has had 2 balls put in inappropriate places. Either way, it proved to be a bad idea for Archie Biggs because he broke his pinky finger on Courtney's face. Courtney didn't break his arm and didn't break his hand, unless you want to blame him for being too slow to duck or for having bones that were too strong or something, facial bones. After it was reported, Biggs' right hand was puffed to double normal size and contained a wire holding broken knuckle bones together. Drank a lot of milk, did Clint Courtney, apparently. Here's where Martin's memories got really baroque and exaggerated. The Senators were now without their second baseman, so as I indicated earlier, Martin moved to the Keystone for the rest of his life. But who was to play third? Well, mostly a pitcher named Graham, who could also hit. But on days when Graham was pitching, the Senators tried a kid from Oakland, a 17-year-old catcher named Ed. Now try to follow me on this. According to Martin, directly after the Biggs incident, like the next day, he was forced to miss one of the few games that he sat out that year due to an injured or infected toe. The unlucky Eddie LeMade got the start at third base. Courtney was on first, Martin told biographer Maury Allen. There was a hit to right field, and Courtney, who couldn't run a lick, was out from here to California. He came into third base, kicked his legs up high, and caught LeMade intentionally on the left leg as he was tagged. He cut the leg to shreds, the blood pouring out all over the base and onto the dirt. LeMade had to have 38 stitches in his foot. He was a real good kid. 4 years later, he was dead. He was shot in the head on patrol in Korea with the Army. In Martin's telling, he was watching all of this in his regular clothes from the stands, but when he saw this assault on this innocent kid, a kid he had gone to high school with, he tried to climb over the fence and get onto the field. The cops held me at the fence, he said, and I just vowed to myself that I would get that guy every chance I got. As soon as he went to the Browns, I got him. So, those 2 major league fights, they weren't about Courtney's aggression on the bases. They were justifiable revenge. First problem, no one named Eddie LeMade has ever shown up in organized baseball or an American census. That's okay, though, because we're not done. In David Faulkner's Billy Martin biography, the player's name was Eddie LeNeve, an inexperienced reserve catcher who was spiked by Courtney, who was running from first base on a single to right. The play ended with Billy literally flying in from second base and leveling Courtney. Billy was on Courtney before the dust cloud even settled. Catcher Buck Elliott said, "Boom. I mean, it was instantaneous. And then it seemed like everybody on both benches got into it. It was one hell of a brouhaha." No one named Eddie Lenive has ever showed up in organized baseball or an American census. I want to point out, spelled Lenieve, Eddie Lenive. Like Steve Neve, I think, who played keyboards for Elvis Costello. Not a problem, because in Peter Golenbach's Martin biography, not number 1, but a second book he wrote after Martin had passed, Eddie LeMaid, or Eddie Lenive, becomes Eddie Lance. He got killed in Korea. He quotes Martin as saying, "We played high school ball together. All that year I missed only one game, and that was the game. Eddie was playing third base, and he's got Courtney out by 20 feet, and Courtney jumps up and rips his right leg open. That day I couldn't get to him. I was in the stands. But from that day on, every time I got a chance, I punched him. Every time." This version makes it sound like Billy, Eddie, and Clint Courtney were all together on the high school ball field in Berkeley. And by the by, Maury Allen sort of conflates the Phoenix story with Martin playing briefly earlier that season in Idaho. Idaho's got nothing to do with it. And just for the record, Clint went to high school in Arkansas and was drafted in 1944 and stayed in the service until 1947. In 1944, Billy Martin was 16. High school had nothing to do with it. Now, I did find the odd Eddie Lance in the American census, but you know who never played organized baseball? Eddie Lance. So let me cut to the end here. The real player was Edward Kozid Lenive, or Lenive, Leneve. I am guessing it was pronounced Lenive, which explains how at least one writer spelled it with an I in the middle, which, again, is not how he appears in the baseball records. He was 17 years old at the time of this story. He had a brief, very brief career in the minors, spanning 1947 to 1948. For some reason, Baseball Reference doesn't think he got into any games with the Phoenix Senators that year, but he did. He's not on their roster page, which is why I missed him. Once I had the right spelling, I could find him individually, but they still don't have any stats for him. He caught some, and as Martin remembered, spotted at third base, taking over for him when he moved to second to replace Biggs. The play Martin was remembering seemingly or apparently took place on August 3rd, 1947. Billy did not miss the game. He was not in the stands. He was batting second and playing second. Lenive played third base. The game story says simply, in the top of the 7th, Clint Courtney, Bisbee catcher, who is reputed to have spiked 10 men this season, slid into Eddie Lenive playing third base for the Senators and cut Lenive on the hand, forcing him to drop a peg that would have put the runner out. Lenive did later leave the game. Oddly enough, it was Courtney who was reported to have left for the hospital. Lenive was back in the lineup the very next day. However, the finger injury did put him on the bench a couple of days after that. He returned a month later, then was called up to Oakland to finish out the season, as was Billy Martin, and his career progressed from there. He did tell the truth about Eddie Lenive dying in North Korea on December 2nd, 1950. He was fighting with the Marines as a rifleman in one of the bigger military debacles in American history, the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. And I was going to tell that story here too. If any of you want to hear it, maybe I'll do it next reissue or in the first act of the show next week. Just let me know. For now, suffice it to say that the Marines suffered about 4,400 battle casualties in that fight and another 7,400 non-battle casualties, mostly frostbite, because the battle, which was a surprise attack by the Chinese across the border into North Korea as American and United Nations forces, not to mention South Korean forces, were driving up north, took place in crazy low temperatures, minus 20, 30, 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know the precise circumstances of Eddie's death, but the battle began on November 27th with the Chinese attack very near the border. As I said, that's where the most advanced American units were, and the fight lasted about 2 weeks as the Americans had to fight their way back southeast to the coast. That Eddie died on December 2nd, very early in the withdrawal, makes me think that he had the bad luck to be at the very tip of the spear when things got extremely hairy, extremely sad, It's tough to read about or watch documentaries about this experience in American history. I believe there was, to use the word experience again, an episode of the PBS show The American Experience about the withdrawal from North Korea in late 1950. It was really a terrifying experience for everyone who went through it. Harrowing would be a better word. And as I was refreshing my memory about this, as I was trying to figure out what happened to this friend of Billy Martin's, I kept thinking about the TV show MASH, which was still running when I was a kid, and then, of course, was in syndication. So whatever I missed the first time it aired, I caught multiple times later. And yeah, it was a great show. It's an all-time great show. I can't argue with that. However, what I kept thinking about was, how did anyone ever laugh at any aspect of this? I realized we're also a culture that made Hogan's Heroes a sitcom about a Nazi POW camp, but holy moly. In summary, Clint Courtney was a problematic player. He started fights. That said, he wasn't some kind of exaggerated Ty Cobb type trying to spike players in their femoral arteries. He didn't break Arky Big's arm. He didn't open Eddie LeMaide's, Leneve's, Lenive's, Lenose's leg, nor Eddie Lake's, causing him to get stitches in his foot? What? He just injured his finger. And even that is sort of speculative, because how many times have you seen players get their fingers hurt on just standard tag plays? And there was no brawl then. It was just a play in a ball game. There are no reports of Martin madly clawing his way onto the field, especially since he was on the field in the first place. Martin was just trying to cast himself in a heroic light by slagging a player who by that point had been dead for a while. Let me leave you with this story that I kind of like. Well, two little anecdotes from Clint Courtney's life. This one is from his managing career. His team had lost a game, and he had argued with the umpire during the game, as often happens. Nothing special about that. However, after the game, he ran into the umpire on the street and resumed the argument. A rowdy policeman overheard it and hauled him off to the local constabulary, sometimes called a jail. Courtney was charged with creating a public disturbance and using abusive language. "How do you plead?" asked the judge. "Not guilty," said Courtney. "I may have swore some, Judge, but I didn't use no abusive language." That's almost Yogi Berra-ish, right? But I like this one better because it's so cynical and knowing. As I said, Courtney was a rancher. This story was told in the memoirs of the longtime ball player and executive Eddie Robinson. He wrote, "Clint owned a farm in Coushatta, Louisiana, and had begun to raise chickens. He talked one of our young pitchers, Jack Fisher, into going into the chicken business with him, and they bought 2,000 baby chicks to raise. The chicks were doing fine until one day Courtney came into the clubhouse, walked over to Fisher and said, 'Jack, we've got a real problem. Our chicks caught a disease and your half died.'" You know, I almost didn't tell that story because I'm so sensitive to animals being harmed that I just didn't want to hear myself say it. Should you wish to suffer the harm of attendance on social media, you can follow me at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. And there remains a Facebook group. Despite my best efforts, I'm getting pretty frustrated. Find pictures of, well, Billy Martin kneeing people in the groin. Maybe I'll find more. Maybe there'll be a whole series of Billy Martin crotching people from now on. Should you wish to support the show like the three fellers I thanked earlier on, and I very much hope you do, please visit patreon.com/theinfiniteinning. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. Finally, should you find yourself with a moment to spare, please go to the podcatcher of your choice and rate, review, and subscribe. It helps the show gain attention. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, try it anyway, but make sure you hold your hands down low like soccer players during a penalty kick, just in case Billy is around and looking for trouble. Our theme song, which you are hearing now and have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of guess who? Me and Dr. Rick Mooring, who reminds you that, as I once said to the eminent English teacher John Canary, a man never knows what kind of a fool he is until he hears the sound he makes after being kneed in the groin. Well, what experience is that based on? I took that class. If reviewing the old yearbooks for clues doesn't get me too melancholy, I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.